Okay, I understand that this class gets started on time, and so we're already late. So I've already blown it first thing. You got a substitute teacher today. Chris is sick, and he got sick pretty fast, and I think he's pretty sick, pretty bad. So he didn't try it today. So he asked if we would bring the fellowship hall class, my class, in here, whether I would just teach everybody in here. So I'm sorry, you got a substitute. That's never as good, but here we all are together anyway. This is the Basic Bible Principles class, and it is a class for mostly new converts, new people to the congregation, to people that are needing kind of a little jump start back on some things maybe they studied a long time ago but have forgotten. So it's just the basic principles of the Bible. Hence we call it Basic Bible Principles. Just combines all of those thoughts. I'm going to try not to stand behind this thing too much today because I'm too short. And I just look like a shrimp back here. I look kind of ridiculous. So, I mean, y'all may not be able to see me from over on that side if I'm over here, but I'm going to try, and I'll have to step back here to read some from the Bible, but otherwise I'll just stand over here and lean on it. Even at that, I have to raise my arm pretty high to get up here. It's almost uncomfortable. So I'm just babbling around while everybody's coming in and getting situated. I usually don't have a lot of discussion in my class in there. I might ask a question or two today, and even if I don't ask a question, if you have a comment, raise your hand. I'll be looking out, hopefully watching for you, and I don't mind you making a comment, but I'm probably not going to ask a lot of questions just for discussion's sake. We usually have to cover quite a bit of territory in a hurry because this class, by the way, is a one-year curriculum. It starts in September with a study of creation and things kind of scientific that applies to that. That's something that new converts often wonder about, want to know more about. Then there's a study of the deity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit that continues for a while. And then there's a long section on the Bible as a book. What is in this book? Where did it come from? Who wrote it? How is it preserved? How do we know it's right? There's just a lot of things that apply to that. And we're kind of coming down toward the end of that study. We only have another couple of weeks left on that study of the Bible. We're studying from this chart, and I know it's hard to see in this room. It's a big room. Well, that screen looks better than the one back there that I'm looking at. But we're looking at this chart right now that shows the three dispensations of time that are in the Bible. It's good to know these things whenever you start reading and studying the Bible for yourself, or if you're in a Bible class or in a sermon, you're listening to a sermon and the teacher or the preacher is mentioning things to kind of know where you are in the Bible outline. So the patriarchal dispensation is a time when God spoke directly to the fathers of the households. And then the Mosaic period is when God dealt with his people through the law of Moses that had been given to them. And then the Christian dispensation is what we're in now, the period of time now that will continue on until the return of Christ. So you see the red circles are things that we've studied already. We've looked at creation. We've looked at the Garden of Eden and what happened there. Noah, the story of Noah and a righteous man and his family that were delivered through the waters of the flood. and delivered from the awful wickedness that had filled the earth during his day. God delivers his people. And this was one of the things that was necessary, deliverance from wickedness. And then we looked at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Jacob's name was changed to Israel, and his children, his sons, became the heads of the tribes of Israel. The next circle is Egypt. They went into Egypt to live and went into bondage for hundreds of years, and then God delivered them from the bondage of Pharaoh through the waters of the Red Sea. And they went then to Mount Sinai, where they received the law, and they were afraid to go in and try to take the land that God had given them, so God sentenced them to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until that faithless generation had died, and then their children, who would then be older people, would be able to enter into the land. So then there was another crossing of water, by the way, another deliverance. This time God delivered them from the mediocrity of just wandering uselessly around in the wilderness with nothing really to accomplish, just existing from day to day. And he said, okay, I'm going to deliver you from that. You can cross the Jordan River now, and you go into the promised land, and you'll have some meaning there. You'll be able to do something to become your own nation and to have your own cities and your own farms. So he delivered them from mediocrity. The next two circles have to do with, the first one is Joshua and the conquest, and we talked about on the map the land that God had promised to Joshua in the first chapter, verses 1 to 4. He told them, here's exactly the dimensions of what I'm going to give you. And in the days of Solomon, the people of Israel actually had acquired all of that land. Solomon reigned over that entire area that you see that was described to Joshua. And while they were in that land, they divided the land up into sections where each tribe had their own parcel of land that was theirs. And so we looked at that. This is just kind of reviewing here for the sake of those who weren't here. The book of Judges, we went through and talked about this. There was a cycle that happens 12 times. It just happens over and over again. The people sin and stray off into idolatry. And then there is oppression by some foreign nation that comes in, and the people are sore distressed, and after a while they finally begin to cry out to God, and they say, we're sorry that we did it. Would you deliver us? And so God would deliver them by sending a judge, and this judge would be a person that would lead them against their foes, and they would be victorious, and then they'd be happy, and they would be righteous for a period of time, and then they would go back into sin. And the cycle just happens over and over, and that is the book of Judges. That lasted for 355 years. Now today, this is where we pick up, and we're going to go to the book of 1 Samuel chapter 8. So this is new for our class today. I'm going to read quite a bit here, and then if you have comments about that, well, let me know what you're thinking. Verse 4. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. Now they have been having judges for 355 years and going through this cycle. Now they come to Samuel, and they said to him, Behold, you have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king for us to judge us, like all the nations. But the thing was displeasing in the sight of Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, Listen to the voice of the people in regard to all that they say to you. For they have not rejected you, they have rejected me from being king over them. So the people, once again, they were being influenced by the outside nations, like they were influenced into idolatry by the outside nations. This time they're saying, all those other countries, they have kings. Why can't we have a king? We want a king too. And so Samuel said, well, God is your king. It's funny, that's what God always wanted. He always wanted to be the king of his people. Israel rejected him in that capacity. And a long time went before finally he established his kingdom, in which Jesus is the king. Jesus is the king today over his kingdom and the head of his church. And so God has brought back what it is he always really wanted, a spiritual kingdom with a spiritual headship. So he said, don't feel bad about this, Samuel. They've rejected me, really. And he says, like all the deeds which they have done, since the day that I brought them up from Egypt, even to this day, they really haven't changed. They just keep doing the same mistakes over and over. He said, in that day they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Now listen to their voice, however. You shall solemnly warn them and tell them of the procedure of the king who will reign over them. God said, I'll give you a king, but you really ought to know what it's going to be like to have a king. It's not what you think it's going to be like. And so from verse 10 all the way to 18, he starts listing things. He said, that king is going to take your sons from you. Your sons that work on your farm and work in your business, and you're all one big happy family here. He's going to take your sons, and they're going to drive his chariots, and they're going to be his horsemen, and they're going to run before the chariots. They're going to be the commanders of my armies, and they're going to do plowing of his fields, and they're going to reap harvests for him. I'm just reading down, I'm skipping through these verses. I've got them marked so I can see these real easy. Verse 13, he will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields. He's going to take your vineyards. He's going to take your olive groves. And he will take 1/10 of your seed and of your vineyards. In other words, that's tax. He's going to tax you pretty heavy. You want a king, well, you're going to have taxes. Kings do that. He's going to take, verse 16, your male servants, your female servants, your best young men, your donkeys, 1/10 of your flock, more taxes, and you yourselves will become his servants. Then you will cry out in that day because of your king whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. So he said, don't say I didn't warn you. This is what it's going to be like. And you know what they say right after that? Oh well. We want a king. I don't know. They either didn't believe him or else they didn't care. They just wanted a king so bad. They didn't like having God as their spiritual king. So that then began the 120 years of the United Kingdom. God gave them a king who reigned 40 years, and another king for 40 years, and another king for 40 years. 120 years of the first three kings. And during that time, all of those tribes, all up and down the country, were all united behind that king and behind the law of Moses. So we look at Saul, the first king. What was he like? In chapter 9 and verse 1 says, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish. And so here starts the hard part, is like 7 names here. And Kish was the son of Abiel, who was the son of Zeror, who was the son of Bechorath, who was the son of Aphiah, who was the son of Benjamin, a Benjamite. And this man, Kish, was a mighty man of valor. So Saul is the king. Verse 2, he had a son. Kish had a son whose name was Saul. He was a choice and handsome man. There was not a more handsome person than he among the sons of Israel. From his shoulders and up, he was taller than any of the people. So he was tall, he was handsome, probably dark as well. I mean, he had it all. And that's all that he needed. That's the only thing he needed. He came from a valiant family. Everybody respected that family. His father Kish was a valiant man. The family had been valiant people. And now here's the son of the valiant family. He's tall, dark, and handsome. All you have to do is just stand up there. People will see you above the crowd. They'll follow you. And you only have one job. There's only one thing I want you to do. I want you to trust me. God said, I want you to trust me and obey me. Just trust and obey. And your handsomeness and your tallness will do all the rest. They're going to follow you. Just trust what I tell you to do and obey me. Pretty simple. That's funny. That's kind of what God expects of us. He said, I'm pretty much going to do it for you. I'm doing everything for you. I just want you to trust me and obey me. Can you do that? Can you just do that, church? As an individual, as a church, can you just trust me and obey me? Obey what I say. Listen to me. Well, he didn't do it. Let's go over to chapter 15. And so we're skipping through some stuff. It's an interesting story. Go home and read it. We're not reading everything. We're just kind of looking at what happened. And there's a lot of details, trappings that are in between. But in chapter 15, Samuel came to Saul. And he said, the Lord sent me to anoint you as king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore listen to the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel. Amalek was a tribe of people, the Amalekites. And whenever the Israelites had come out of Egypt and they were trying to come into the promised land, the Amalekites didn't let them pass through their land. And God promised, I'm going to punish you for having done that. Not going to do it right now because we're trying to get these people on into the promised land, but we will square this up one day. So he says, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel. Now, he set himself against him on the way while he was coming up from Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek and utterly destroy all that he has. Do not spare him, but put to death both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. A rather distasteful command. I don't know who would enjoy a thing like that. But that's what God had promised that he was going to do. And he said, now we're going to do it and you're going to do it. You're the king. I just want you to go do what I tell you. And he said, the only ones that I want you to spare are who? Nobody. Okay, I want you to spare nobody. Now look at verse 7. So Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as far as you go to Shur, which is east of Egypt. And he captured Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive. And he utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were not willing to destroy them utterly, but everything despised and worthless, that they utterly destroyed. Now, to me, the distasteful part would have been killing all those people. But the Israelites didn't have much of a distaste for that. What was distasteful to them was killing all those good animals. Why, they're worth something. We ought to keep some of those. So they disobeyed what God said, and they brought back the king and all the best of all of these animals. Verse 20. Then Saul said to Samuel, well, verse 19. Samuel comes out and he says, why didn't you obey the voice of the Lord? But rushed upon the spoil and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So he said, how come you didn't obey God? What did he tell you to do? And Saul said to Samuel, well, I did. I did obey the Lord. I did obey the voice of the Lord. And I went on the mission. I mean, he told me to go on the mission. I went on the mission. See how I obeyed the Lord? I went on the mission which the Lord sent me, and I have brought back Agag, the king of Amalek, and I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. So you see, I went on the mission, and I utterly destroyed the Amalekites. So you see, I did obey the Lord. What about that middle part? You remember the part where you brought back Agag, the king? Oh yeah, well, verse 21, you see, the people took some of the spoil. The people did it. They took the sheep and the oxen and the choicest of the things devoted to destruction. And the reason they brought them, it was to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal. And isn't that noble? In the name of worship, we can disobey the Lord. If it's worship, in order to worship God, we can just do whatever we want, whatever we think would be best. That's okay to do it that way. And then Samuel says to him in verse 22, do you think the Lord has as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Sure. He wants you to sacrifice. He wants you to worship. But do you know what he wants first and foremost, more than anything? He just wants you to obey what he says. Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice. And to listen to the voice of the Lord is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination. Divination is witchcraft, foreseeing the future, that kind of stuff. Occultic stuff. To rebel against what God said to do is like or as bad as occultism. And insubordination is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. So now the die is cast because of what you have done. The kingship will not pass on to your heir. It's going to end with you. Now, Saul went on to stay king for quite a while, and he could have gone ahead and humbled himself before God and become obedient to God, even though the throne wouldn't go to his heir. Nevertheless, he still could have obeyed God and humbled himself, but instead, he bowed up against God and pretty much lost his mind, just became insane. And when you know that you are disobeying God, and you just keep doing it, it will really work on you, and you become kind of crazy person. Scott, what were you going to say?
If the Israelites had striven to walk and obey God and walk in the foot of the law, that progressively there would have been very few, if any, sacrifices required.
Why? What do you mean? Explain that.
I guess if they really tried to obey the law and walk in it, and their leaders led them to that the sacrifices for sin, or wouldn't have been necessary
Oh,
if they had progressed in that.
oh well, yeah. I suppose that if you got to where you just never broke any of the 10 Commandments, which are a little hard to keep all the time, the people would still have had to have sacrifices. But boy, if they'd obeyed him nationally, it sure would have been a different picture. That's for sure.
In verse 22,
Verse 22,
23,
23.
the rebellion and so on, and mine says arrogance. That would be more idolatry.
Oh, arrogance. Yeah. He was arrogant, wasn't he? Yeah. Well, I mean, after all, he was tall, dark, and handsome. I mean, you can be arrogant then. I can't be arrogant. I can't even see over this speaker stand. I sure don't fit the mold. But yeah, he was. He just thought, well, I think I'll just do whatever I want to. And he may have been insecure in the fact that maybe the people did want to do that, and maybe he did, kind of bow to them. Say, yeah, we'll do what they want to do. Not good leadership. So that's what happened with Saul, and the rest of the story is just a succession of a downward spiral of just getting crazier and crazier and worse and farther from God. But God had determined that David was going to be the next king. We, for the most part, we liked David. He was, always kind of a hero to me as a kid growing up in Sunday school classes, and the stories about David. He's described in 1 Samuel 13 and Acts 13 as being a man after God's own heart. I've always taken that to mean that was his quest. What he was after in his life, what he was trying to achieve, was the heart of God. He wanted to be like God. He really had an ambition to be a holy and a godly man. And he comes across in the Psalms that he wrote and in his life as being a worshipful person, and as being, he was the writer of almost, all the Psalms. He led the armies of God against their enemies. And so he extended the borders of Israel greatly during his reign. God told him he couldn't build the temple because there was blood on his hands, but he gathered the materials from countries far and wide, brought in the choicest of materials to build a temple for God in Jerusalem. But that didn't happen until Solomon was the king. But David did have a big downfall, and I think when God thought about the blood on his hands, certainly one of the most outstanding blood that he had on his hands was that of Uriah the Hittite, who was the husband of a beautiful woman by the name of Bathsheba. And David saw her through her window. He was in the palace, looked through the window and saw her bathing. He began to have lust for her. He sent for her and took her into his bedroom. And so he fulfilled the lust that he had. And you think, well, okay, so that's that, but not really. She was pregnant after that. And so David thought, man, we're going to have to come up with some way that she was pregnant at this time. So he called for Uriah the Hittite to come from the battle. He wasn't even an Israelite. He was more devoted to the God and the army of God than David was. And he called for Uriah to come home. He said, Uriah, you need a little break. Why don't you go spend a little time with your wife? And Uriah said, I can't do that while the army of God is out fighting and me going into my wife. And so he just slept on the porch until it was time for him to go back again. And everybody knew that. And so David went, oh, well, maybe people didn't know that. And maybe if he dies in battle, then people will assume that he did go into his wife. And so he gave the order to Uriah to take to the captain of the army, and Uriah delivered his own death sentence. And it said, whenever you're in the heat of battle, everybody withdraw and leave Uriah out in the forefront and let him be killed. So that's what they did. So David had a lot of accomplishments. He seemed to be a man that tried to be close to God, and yet he was a human being. He failed, and God said, you're not going to be able to build my temple for me. But he still reigned for 40 years, and after that, Solomon became the king of Israel for 40 years. In 1 Kings 4, verses 29 to 34, it tells about the beginning of his reign as king, and God appeared to him in a dream, and God said to him, I'll give you whatever you want. What do you want? What would you say? We have lots of jokes about that. What if there was a genie, you rub the lamp and the genie comes out, I'll give you whatever you want. What would you ask for? And you think of all the things Solomon might have asked for, and yet the thing he asked for was wisdom. If I could just have wisdom, because I'm young and I've got the whole responsibility of this mighty kingdom, and if you would just give me the wisdom to know what to do. And God said, I will give you wisdom. Greater wisdom than anybody's ever had. And so Solomon was renowned far and wide, not only for the riches that God helped him to accumulate, and for the expanse of the borders, all the way to the entire territory that God had promised he would give to the Israelites. Not only just in that, but because of his scientific endeavors and his knowledge of so many things. People came just to sit at his feet and listen to him. He was just filled with wisdom that came from God. He wrote the book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, the major bulk of what we call the wisdom literature books of the Old Testament. Solomon wrote those. And he built the great temple in Jerusalem, Solomon's temple. It was magnificent. It was big. It was ornate. It was great. And he knew, even he himself knew, Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13, fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. He knew that because he wrote it. And yet we find in 1 Kings 11, verses 1 to 13, that he turned from God in his old age. Hard to believe. What caused him to be led away? Anybody know? Yeah. He had too many women in his life. The bad thing, they were foreign women. It was all these women of the people who had these idols that they worshipped, and they were an influence on him. He had hundreds of wives. It was just a kind of a kingly thing. Wasn't a God thing. It was just what they saw other kings that you did. You kind of solidified alliances by taking, queens from other places to be your queen, and all that kind of stuff. But they did have an influence on him, and after a while, he started becoming like they were, and he turned from God. So that's pretty sad. And you see these three kings of the united kingdom. The kingdom is united, and yet these kings, all of them had faults. And if you stop and think about it, as you study the Bible, you're going to find almost every major character, minor character, but especially the major characters that you might be inclined to think, well, we need to become just like them, but there's always a fault. Always a fault. And God pointed that out in His Word. There's only one sinless person, and He's the one we should follow. And it's interesting that the Bible does point out faults in every hero. Okay. So what happens next? Solomon died in 931 BC. And then we enter into another period. Our little red circle has moved to the next one there, and we're now in the divided kingdom. Israel is divided. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 43. We'll read a little bit there. We have a few minutes left now. 1 Kings 11, 43. Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of his father David, and his son Rehoboam reigned in his place. Well, now we have a new king, the son of Solomon, Rehoboam. So then it says, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. Now it came about when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, or Nabat, heard of it, that he was living in Egypt, for he was yet in Egypt where he had fled from the presence of King Solomon. So this guy Jeroboam comes back now, and they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father made our yoke hard. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. Then he said to them, Depart for 3 days, then return to me. So the people departed. And King Rehoboam consulted with the elders who had served his father Solomon while he was still alive, saying, How do you counsel me to answer this people? So he goes and talks to the elders, to the older guys, and they spoke to him, saying, If you will be a servant to this people today, will serve them, grant them their petition, and speak good words to them, they will be your servants forever. But he forsook the counsel of the elders which they had given him, and consulted with the young men who grew up with him, and served him. And so he said to them, What counsel do you give, that we may answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, Lighten the yoke which your father put on us? And the young men who grew up with him spoke to him, saying, Thus you shall say to this people who spoke to you, saying, Your father made your yoke heavy, now you make it lighter for us. But you shall say to them, My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. Whereas my father loaded you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. And so after 3 days, everybody comes back and they say, Well, what did you decide to do? And he said, Boy, if you thought you had it hard before, you ain't seen nothing yet. I'm the king. I can do what I want. And we're going to lay it on you. We're going to work you harder. We're going to tax you more than you've ever had before. And they said, Fine and dandy. Then we'll just go become our own country. And so Jeroboam led the northern 10 tribes of Israel away. And they separated because of this. He was given some pretty good advice after the fact that they had really been put to it by Solomon to build up that empire. You know, he had to call on a lot from the people, and now they had it, and so it would have been probably prudent to go ahead and say, well, you know, we're going to ease up a little bit. But he didn't, and so the kingdom divided. So you see Judah up here. I'm not pushing any more buttons on here. I don't know what they all do. No telling what might happen. But you see Judah in the green down here, and Simeon had been kind of absolved into the tribe of Judah. And Reuben's off over here to the side, but Reuben joined in with all the rest of them, and they became what was called the 10 tribes, the northern tribes of Israel. And so there was Judah as a tribe, and then there was the northern 10 tribes. They were Israel, and then there was Judah. So from this point on, it's designated these two ways, Israel and Judah. So, 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 25. I think we'll finish this up right quick. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. And he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will return to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will return to their Lord, even to Rehoboam, king of Judah. And they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So the king consulted and made 2 golden calves. And he said to them, it is too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Behold, your gods, O Israel, that brought you up from the land of Egypt. He set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. So Dan is way up at the north, the very top little brown one up there. And then Bethel is in this kind of purple one that says Ephraim. There's a little place called Bethel, means house of God. He put a golden calf there at the southern border of Israel and one at the northern border, and he said, you don't have to go so far this way to worship. If you live in the north, just go up to Dan. If you live in the south, go down to Bethel. And so that way it'd be a lot easier for you. And he took people that were not of the tribe of Levi and made them priests. He was just really doing a lot of abominable things that broke the law, that was against the law of Moses. And so because of that, because of this sin, the northern tribes of Israel were taken away into Assyrian captivity in 721. They were disseminated amongst the nations, and they never came back and became a people again. In 606, by this time, Judah had become also idolatrous. They had become rebellious toward God. And Judah was taken away into Babylon. And in 586, then Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians. So the divided kingdom ended up being no kingdom. It became a kingdom in captivity. Judah returned after 70 years in 536. They came back, rebuilt a temple, rebuilt the city of Jerusalem, and then in 400 BC, the last Old Covenant prophet, Malachi, closes out the Old Testament books. So a little thumbnail sketch of what happened with the kings of Israel and Judah. And so next time our class is going to talk about Christ, because Christ was born during the Mosaic period of time. And that's a very important point to learn, and we want to spend some time seeing what the New Testament says about Christ being under the law of Moses during his earthly life. So we'll go to that next time. I think that this is about the right time. Everybody's nodding. Yeah. It's about time, all right. All right, so let's take a little break and we'll